True security, true recovery, true peace. This is what all of us need. In Ukraine, in the United States, in Europe, and every partner who is helping us. The President of Ukraine emphasized this while commenting on today's conversation with President Trump's special representative Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The head of state thanked his interlocutors for their constructive and intensive work, as well as for congratulating Ukrainians on Christmas. And he emphasized his gratitude. There are good and thoughtful ideas that can truly work for the sake of achieving a common result and lasting peace. We are working 24/7 to bring an end to this brutal Russian war against Ukraine and to ensure that all documents and steps are realistic, effective, and reliable. Let today's conversation be another important step toward peace, the President emphasized. And earlier, President Zelensky unveiled a draft peace plan consisting of 20 points. This is the result of numerous consultations between Ukrainian and American negotiators. Europeans also took part in the discussions. However, as President Volodymyr Zelensky noted, several points of this foundational document remain under debate and require further consultations. We will now show what proposals the plan contains and which points currently lack clear wording.
Point number 1. Ukraine is a sovereign state, and all signatories confirm this. Russia and Ukraine commit not to attack each other. The number of Ukrainian armed forces in peacetime will reach 800,000. The US, NATO, and Europe will provide Ukraine with security guarantees following the example of NATO's Article 5. And Ukraine will become a member of the EU. Several funds will be created for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The goal is to attract $800 billion. We will continue to be a non-nuclear state, and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will be jointly operated by Ukraine, the US, and Russia. Exactly how this will happen has not yet been finally decided. Discussions are also ongoing regarding the issue of territories. There are two options here. In the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions, the border will be fixed along the line where the troops are positioned. On the date the agreement is signed, it will be controlled by international forces. Alternatively, and this is the other option, a free economic and demilitarized zone is created in Donbas. Ukraine proposes a mirror withdrawal of troops, and the territorial issue is to be resolved by referendum. All prisoners of war and civilians, including children, return home. Ukraine must hold elections as soon as possible after the agreement is signed. After all issues are agreed upon, a complete ceasefire takes place.
The new peace settlement plan has already been received in the Kremlin. And now, as the spokesperson for the Russian dictator Peskov said, the document is being analyzed. Further actions, they say, will depend on Putin's decisions. Meanwhile, top American military officials are offering their advice. We need to prepare for the situation when Moscow rejects the peace plan. And they say, a crucial part of this preparation is to significantly ramp up the production of weapons and ammunition in Europe. Because if Ukraine has to continue holding back Russia on the front lines, the Allies must supply the armed forces of Ukraine. They must not allow either a shortage of weapons or ammunition. Our special correspondent in Washington, Dmytro Anopchenko, reports on the main challenges.
If you want peace, prepare for war, or more precisely, prepare to keep holding back Russia. I hear this now from many top American experts. The point of these warnings and appeals is that, regardless of how peace negotiations go, Ukraine must continue to strengthen its military. If the so-called Witkoff plan works and there is a truce, that's great, but weapons will still be needed so that Russia cannot attack again. If the Kremlin breaks the agreements, then these weapons will be needed immediately at the front. The problem is that the war has depleted European and American arsenals. And all the new threats that Russia creates, including hybrid ones, all those drones, arson attacks, sabotage, are forcing Europeans to change the criteria for their own defense capabilities to keep more air defense systems, weapons, or missiles for themselves, which under other circumstances they would have given to Ukraine. And when a united Europe, through the words of von der Leyen, promises that support for Ukraine is unwavering, that it will last as long as needed. In particular, regarding the supply of weapons and ammunition, these beautiful and correct words still require concrete actions. And with those, things are not so simple. At the same time, Brussels admits that recent years have revealed the EU's unpreparedness for high-intensity warfare and a lack of capacity. Just last year here in Washington, NATO allies adopted a plan in which they committed to expanding defense production in order to replenish their own stockpiles while continuing to arm Ukraine at the same time. fresh ones. NATO's official documents also carefully record the important commitment that the increase in military spending by alliance countries, which was strongly pushed through by former President Trump, must also ensure a steady and reliable flow of weapons and military equipment to Kyiv. From sources here in Washington, I keep hearing that there really isn't much hope at all that Moscow will accept the new version of the plan. Vice President Vance estimated the chances as 50-50. And so, according to internal discussions, the White House needs to provide guarantees to the Europeans that American weapons for Ukraine will be sold to them without obstacles and that there will be no pauses. But there are also political risks here because Trump, as is well known, is a man of moods. He could change his mind, and there are objective problems as well. Here's just one example. 155mm shells, which are needed in huge quantities for artillery. At the front, the US has started producing several times more compared to the first years of the war. But over the entire current year, they managed to produce just over 2 million units, while Ukraine's need exceeds 7 million. Analytics also show that Russia still outpaces NATO in terms of ammunition production volumes. And if it suddenly decides to escalate hostilities, there will once again be a shortage. A top military official agreed to comment on both specific weapons issues and broader political questions. A person who is very pro-Ukrainian and at the same time highly respected. General Ben Hodges. The latest news in the press that Witkov's 28 points have indeed been reduced to 20 and which specific points were removed has somewhat reassured those in the West who are concerned about whether the peace plan will be fair for Ukraine.
Because when people put the original text into ChatGPT or Google Translate, it became obvious that it was a Russian text just translated into English. And unfortunately, it's quite possible that this was indeed the case because the Trump administration, both the president himself, the vice president, and Mr. Witkov seem to be satisfied with the Russian perspective. And the Europeans were initially bypassed. Only now are they starting to play a serious role.
And this is precisely the role of the EU. The general sees it as making sure Ukraine isn't forced into accepting conditions against its will. And, looking ahead, in ensuring Kyiv is supplied with weapons, which will be necessary in any case, regardless of how the peace process unfolds.
I think we were close to the worst-case scenario if everything had been left to the discretion of the Trump administration. That's why it's so important for Europe to have influence. And when I say Europe, I of course mean not just the EU but the West as a whole, including the United Kingdom, Norway, and Canada so that they can use their collective influence.
And regarding the role of Europeans in supplying weapons and the need to constantly ask Washington for permission, particularly for long-range strikes, Hodges speaks very emotionally, saying,
I'm honestly getting a bit sick of hearing Europeans, whining, saying things like, the Americans this, the Americans that. But in terms of economic size, wealth, industrial capacity, and technology, Europe far surpasses Russia, so they really shouldn't have been bending to Trump at all. At some point, Europeans will have to either stop complaining and finally start acting independently or accept the consequences of a terrible deal because they are the ones who will have to live with those consequences. If millions more Ukrainian refugees appear, nothing good awaits Europe if things continue as they are.
Hodges is referring to a scenario in which the security guarantees promised to Ukraine are not effective enough to deter Moscow from launching another attack in the future. Therefore, he advises not to agree to any restrictions on Ukraine's future accession to NATO under any circumstances. If it is impossible under Trump, and that is indeed the case, power in the United States still changes from time to time.
Why should this be up to Russia, the US, or anyone else at all? Should anyone even be allowed to dictate who has the right to join the alliance? Almost every country that was once part of the Warsaw Pact rushed to join NATO as quickly as possible because they know exactly what happens if you are not under the alliance's protection.
As for the future, Hodges does not venture to predict what the peace negotiations will look like, although he suspects that Moscow will torpedo them, demanding more and more. But what he is certain of is that the shadow war will continue, even if the actual war stops. It is real.
Russia is already waging war against Europe. No matter how much we all wish it weren't so, and no matter how hard we try to. Not acknowledge it? But all these gray hybrid operations, drones, sabotage, everything Moscow is doing are all manifestations of war. Even if it isn't an open one. If we don't slap the Kremlin on the wrist, the situation will only